One of the favorite quotes of law enforcement in Florida is the saying, law and order. But if you believe in law and order, then you also believe in due process and the Constitution. But if you don't like a particular group of people, and society in general doesn't like a particular group of people, does that mean that you have the right to strip away their due process and constitutional rights? That raises an interesting question, because in the state of Florida, a state that claims to believe in law and order, unconstitutional things have been happening for a while in the handling of the homeless population. One interesting thing that we have to see unfold with the state's new crackdown on homelessness is what's going to happen to the state's 5,000 homeless people who are registered offenders. Florida's registered offenders are required to register their address with the state for the safety of the public. There are 5,000 people in the state of Florida who are homeless registered offenders. Interestingly now, the state of Florida makes being homeless illegal. Does that mean that those individuals who are chronically homeless because they're registered offenders are now going to have to report to the same state that made it illegal to be homeless? Interesting question. Does that constitute entrapment from law enforcement? Should the rights of these individuals matter? Should they have due process? Thus, does an individual who we have no sympathy for still have their constitutional rights? Most likely, Florida's homeless population is around 100,000 people. Now, the state of Florida officially claims that its homeless population is around 36,000 people. However, we've done extensive research on this topic on a county-by-county level, and we've been able to show that some of the counties' reporting of homeless population is far underestimated. Florida Department of Law Enforcement has an online map where you can find out where these individuals live, as they have to be registered with the state. Now, the state of Florida has a large problem with registered offenders, many of which come from states like Washington that have stricter laws. Thus, many of the problems that the state of Florida is facing with the registered offender homeless population actually originated in the state of Washington. On our channel, we've also done extensive research on the neighborhoods that house registered offender population, with neighborhoods like Pervert Park in Pinellas County, Daytona Pines outside of Daytona, and some mobile home parks outside of Lakeland where registered offenders live. In these communities, we found some common denominators, like many of these offenders have extreme right-wing views, Confederate flags, and other types of political propaganda. The state of Florida is doing everything it can to hide, conceal, and eradicate the homeless population by every method except offering assistance to the homeless. Other than the fact homeless people can get about 200 food stamps, that is about as much as they're going to get out of the state of Florida. Many of the shelters, like the Salvation Army in the state of Florida, actually have a fee. So the notion with the new law that requires homeless people to be incarcerated if they are not within a shelter, there's neither enough beds in shelters nor space in prisons or jails in the state of Florida to house nearly 100,000 people who live on the streets. But particularly of interest are the 5,000 who are registered offenders. These individuals are not welcome in shelters. The public is not sympathetic to their cause. Nobody will hire them, and counties like Miami-Dade actually have laws and regulations preventing them from renting apartments. Not only are these people homeless chronically, they're also not welcome to be finding any type of arrangement, whether it's working, housing, or even transportation. These registered offenders are pretty much geographically limited to where they live, not being welcomed in communities, not being given jobs, and of course, nobody is sympathetic to help these individuals. You may be surprised to know that many of the people that we've interviewed on the streets as homeless in our channel, these are individuals who we meet naturally, organically on the street with no previous contact. After interviewing these people and putting their videos on the internet, eventually I do my research and it turns out that these were registered offenders. And many of the homeless people that we've interviewed on our channel are in fact registered offenders. They didn't mention it on their videos, and I didn't know it at the time because, again, I'm meeting these people organically on the streets. Thus, on our YouTube channel, we have actually interviewed a handful of registered offenders, some even registered predators. However, like I said, at the time of making these videos, I wasn't aware of these people's criminal background, so we can understand now, looking back at the people I've interviewed, finding out which ones were registered offenders, that a considerable portion of the most disadvantaged homeless people that we meet are actually individuals who are registered offenders. A huge problem for a state trying to eliminate the homeless population when a significant percentage of the state's homeless population are individuals who are chronically homeless, completely unable to obtain employment, and of course, individuals who couldn't even lease an apartment because apartments have rules that they don't want these types of criminals. Thus, even if the state's new laws on homelessness were to deter homelessness within the state, you still have 5,000 people nearly in the state of Florida who will never be able to arrange their living situation. These are chronically homeless people who already have criminal records and who in fact may have their charges aggravated to a felony by the third offense, which means that perhaps they will end up back in the prison system. Place these individuals desperately do not want to end up because they're not very respected within the prison system. In fact, many of these individuals choose not to own cell phones out of personal choice and practice other things to prevent themselves from being within contact with outside world because of their complete fear of being entrapped back in prison, where they know the cruel treatment that other inmates will give them for their criminal offenses of the past. Numerically, the bulk of Florida's registered offenders are in urban areas, but that is not by percentage. By percentage, counties like Dixie and Gadsden, some of the most rural counties, have the largest percentage of the population who are registered offenders. And that is because in these rural communities, these individuals can distance themselves from society, where they're more likely not to reoffend and be free from the prejudice. Rural communities are more welcoming to these individuals than urban areas. In urban areas, people have children, and they don't want these people anywhere near their communities. Thus, many of these registered offenders, while numerically their numbers are higher in urban areas, by percentage, many of them choose to move to the most remote counties where they don't have to deal with the pressures of society, less population density. Thus, in these rural communities, they're able to distance themselves from the urban population, and that is why, for the most part, many of these registered offenders seem to seek out these rural communities where they can be far away from people, less likely to reoffend. But now, with a large percentage of the homeless offenders choosing urban areas, and some of the analytics we're about to go over today are truly shocking. Take, for example, Broward County. 1 in 4 homeless people in Broward County is a registered offender, and in some areas like the city limits of Fort Lauderdale, 80% of the unsheltered homeless are registered offenders. So basically, when you enter these urban cores, the vast majority of the homeless people are registered offenders. However, in rural counties like Dixie and Gadsden, a larger percentage of the overall population is registered. So we can see that in rural communities, these people seek shelter, but the homeless population in urban cores is plagued with chronic homelessness from the fact that these individuals are registered offenders. And these are the chronic population of Florida that will never actually be housed in a shelter. These are individuals who, if they get to eat on a daily basis, it is because of the mercy of somebody who feeds them. These are individuals who cannot be housed, cannot be employed, cannot live anywhere, and many times, if they're registered, cannot even venture too far from their homeless site. These individuals have absolutely no freedom of mobility. Most people in society look at these individuals as they should be lucky they're still alive, and many of the people who are in this situation actually look at it the same way. They feel that at least they're still alive because society doesn't look at these individuals very favorably. In fact, the legal system has purposely made their living arrangements to be exactly that, because we in society don't want these people in our communities. They really are marginalized on purpose, and nobody has any type of sentiment for these people. The crimes that they committed go against society itself, and nobody is sympathetic for these individuals. Their pitiful situation where even they themselves self-punish for what they've done. Like I said, their existence itself, their ability to have a meal, depends many times on the generosity of somebody else. And that is the way society has purposely created this situation. So when we talk about eliminating homelessness on the streets of Florida, when you have 5,000 people in this particular circumstance where society has created, marginalized them purposely because we don't like who they are as a person, what they've done, these individuals' chronic situation of homelessness has no solution because it was orchestrated, created purposely to be exactly that type of life. Numerically, the city of Jacksonville has the largest population of individuals who are homeless in this state and do not have a permanent address. In the streets of Jacksonville, it is not uncommon to run into individuals in this exact situation, which means that cities like Jacksonville are long-term plagued of homelessness that really has no solution because it's by design, both of the sentiment of the public, the court systems, and law enforcement itself. In total, the state's registry has 78,000 predators, dangerous individuals. That means that even if you are not dealing with homelessness, you may have living in your community people who are registered offenders. You know, I really can't help to draw the conclusion that what the state of Florida is doing now with these laws is similar to what Bukele is doing in El Salvador with the gangsters. They're grabbing people who the society knows are bad and putting them away without any due process. That's kind of what the state of Florida is doing with their homeless registered offender population, except for, of course, it's not going to get the same type of news coverage because the United States is never scrutinized the way other countries are, but it's the same exact thing, really. Despite the state of Florida being among the top 3 largest states by population, it is only the 7th by number of registered offenders. Thus, there's a few states that have a worse situation. In particular, states like Illinois, Michigan, and Oregon stand out very negatively, as well as states like Arkansas, who by rate have a ridiculously dangerous level of offenders. Among the worst, of course, is the state of Oregon. Part of Oregon's problem is the fact that it's adjacent to Washington. Now, both the state of Oregon and Arkansas have the reputation of being registered offender friendly. Now, who wants to live in a place like that? The state of Washington does not tolerate these people, and many people from Washington have ventured into Oregon or Florida because they're not welcome in that state. And now, as Florida tightens its grip on the homeless population, it's also tightening its grips on the chronically homeless registered offenders, a group of people that are definitely undesirable within the state. The most dangerous states for minors being Arkansas, Alabama, and Mississippi by number of registered offenses. Thus, the state of Florida really doesn't rank among the worst. The reason this topic is relevant today is because Florida is going on a full-out war against the homeless population, and these types of individuals make up a significant percentage of the homeless population. Now, the state of Florida has also been trying to cover up the sheer number of homelessness, and by doing that, it will officially appear that a larger percentage of the homeless population is registered since they can't cover up the number of registered offenders. Thus, you can also gauge the number, estimated number of Florida's homeless population by what percentage of the homeless population is a registered offender, which I find to be about 1 in 12, which would confirm my always firm estimate of Florida's population of homelessness being somewhere between 78 to 100,000 people. In any case, if Florida's homeless population estimate was accurate, then 1 in 7 homeless people would be registered. I've randomly interviewed homeless people and ran into homeless people, and that number is at worst 1 to 12, which confirms that Florida's homeless population is at least double what the state is proclaiming. If you have a 3rd grade education, 36,000 is the figure the state of Florida claims the homeless population is. 5,000 of them are registered offenders that are homeless. Thus, if you divide 36 by 5, you get the number 7.2. So in theory, about 1 in 7 homeless people would be a registered offender. If you go out there and find homeless people and actually start doing the research, you'll find that that number in some cities is even as much as 1 in 24. Places like, for example, Manatee County, where for a fact the official number of only 188 homeless people retracts from the fact that realistically, close to 2,000 people are homeless in Manatee County, means the state's presenting a situation that is numerically unrealistic. if you were to grab the county's registered offender population and throw it up against the number of people in the county that are being reported officially, and then you have on top of that the homeless veterans that are being counted, numbers don't add up. In other words, Florida's official number of homelessness, we have already proven, is an inaccurate number. It's corroborated by facts like, for example, Duval County, a county where Jacksonville sits, that has over 2,000 registered offenders living in the county. So when you compare Florida's reported homeless population back against the rates by county, you start to see that the numbers don't add up anywhere. And that is because Florida's homeless population is, again, closer to 100,000 people than 36,000. And we know that because the percentages of homeless veterans and as well as registered offenders that are homeless by county level, when you throw these numbers together, the rates don't add up. So while the state of Florida scrambles to cover up the real number of the homeless population, and the state of Florida has been engaging in practices like not giving homeless people due process when trespassing them, it's been a chronic problem in the state of Florida now for a while, where law enforcement goes above and beyond the law to target homeless people. One thing they're not going to be able to do is eradicate these 5,000 people who are subjectively under the state's obligation, since the state is the one creating their state of chronic homelessness, or at least the state will not be able to really do anything with these people. Now, these individuals really do not want to go back to prison. And the state's new laws, after somebody does break the law 3 times, it will become a felony to be trespassed to the 3rd time, which means that the state of Florida could, in fact, just grab the homeless population of registered offenders and send them on a long trip to prison, which is the last place they want to be, which could, in fact, voluntarily lead these individuals to seek shelter in another state. It will be interesting to see how this new law will affect Florida's homeless registered offenders. Very different population than the regular homeless population, which is more flexible and more able to get their crap together if they want to. These individuals really do not have much mobility, but if left under the current situation, these individuals will be constantly trespassed, leading them back to prison. And if it's for the 3rd time as a felony, we know what that means for these individuals. Now, I personally don't have any sympathy for these individuals and their actions, but I will tell you that that sounds somewhat unconstitutional. Now, I'm not defending these people's rights by any means, but if you think about the logic behind everything we've gone through, if somebody is chronically homeless and the state ensures that these people are chronically homeless, perhaps these individuals will be put in a somewhat unconstitutional handling, since after all, they really do not have any other options. And that also means double jeopardy. You're kind of putting somebody in a situation where they're going to be charged again for the same crime, or being forced to be prosecuted again for the same crime. The constitutionality of all this is interesting and even more complicated for individuals who are in a chronically homeless state because of their registered offenses. And again, I'm not advocating for these people's rights. I'm just posing a very legitimate question of the legality and due process in the nature of these laws and how they're actually going to be affecting individuals that are in this situation in the state of Florida, a chronic problem that every single state faces in the United States, and Florida disproportionately doesn't have one of the worst problems. Florida, again, is somewhere in the middle, but being one of the largest states by population certainly aggravates the problem. Now, the state of Florida has been underreporting its homeless population, and that also raises some interesting questions of, does that portray the homeless population in Florida as more criminal by percentage, and registered offenders and all that seem to be a larger bulk of the homeless population? That also raises some interesting questions if we understand that there's some legality matters here. But at the end of the day, that is the situation in Florida. 5,000 people are chronically homeless in a state that cannot be repaired. Now, many laws are incentive driven, but when you have an individual that's been disowned by society, disowned by their families, chronically homeless, it's questionable what options these individuals are going to have if they decide to leave the state of Florida onto where they're going to go, or even if they're even allowed to go somewhere, since after all, they have to be registered where they go. This raises some very interesting legal questions, which could, at the end of the day, just result in a never-ending gray area for the law, representing a group of individuals here that don't have any rights, don't have the ability to hire somebody to defend their rights, and nobody will defend their rights. It definitely poses some interesting legal questions onto what will happen to these people with these new laws that are coming to the state of Florida, since after all, the vast majority of the homeless population will probably disperse very well when this new law takes place. But what happens to these individuals? My personal opinion, when you have individuals in a circumstance like this, where they have absolutely no options, and then you're going to send them off to a place where they don't want to be, these dangerous individuals many times do unthinkable things. And this could actually be very dangerous for the people of Florida. What's going to happen to these individuals who don't want to go back to prison, aren't able to leave the state, aren't able to fix their chronically homeless situation? On top of that, they're very locatable by law enforcement since they have to register their homeless location, which means that the state could in fact literally find these people where they are, put them in a situation where now after a third offense of trespassing, they're definitely going back to prison. I mean, think about the fact that it will now be illegal to camp homelessly in the state of Florida, and homeless people that are chronically homeless because of their registered offense status, you are now going to register with the state of Florida your location where you're homeless, even though it's illegal to be homeless in the state of Florida. Poses the question, is this legal entrapment for the 5,000 homeless people in the state of Florida? That is a very good legal question to ask. It's illegal to be homeless in Florida, but if you're a homeless registered offender, you have to register with the same state that makes it illegal for you to be homeless, which means you basically have to turn yourself in to law enforcement or report the fact that you're breaking the law to the law. I don't know the legalities of this situation, but to me, not a lawyer, it definitely seems like almost an entrapment where these people are put in a situation where they literally have no other option. Not that I care for these people, but it does raise pretty obvious questions. Personally, one of the most disturbing things that I find about this situation is that whether it's 1 in 7 or 1 in 12, just about every one of these homeless camps does have a registered offender. And I'm starting to see more females in these homeless camps than ever before because of economical reasons or mental health or addiction purposes. Many of these young females who end up on the streets for whatever reason are now living in homeless camps and tents right next to individuals that are very dangerous.